Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you're calling in from around the world, and welcome to V2020. I want to welcome you from all over the United States, but we also have folks calling in from Finland, Milan, Cyprus, Canada, India, Spain. If I forgot a foreign country from the United States, forgive me. Maybe you've just come in, but it's really wonderful to see this wildly international audience. So welcome. My name is Sandy Hart, and I am the lead of the Women and Girls sector of the Charter for Compassion, which is a global network of more than 400 cities of compassion and nearly 3,000 partners organized in 12 sectors and in 56 countries, all focused on promoting the principle of compassion, depending on their unique work and their projects. On behalf of the V2020 Task Force, which is comprised of women and girls ambassadors, I welcome you to the second webinar in our series of V2020. Before we move into the call, let's just do a little bit of housekeeping. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, unless you're calling in from a phone, you'll see a chat bubble, and that's where you can comment or send us any conversation. Do know that we will do our very best to address everyone's comments, but do know that after the initial part of the call, we're going to open up all the cameras, bring you all onto the line, and that's your opportunity to have your voice and your wisdom heard in our after party. This call is recorded and a copy will be sent to you with all links mentioned so you can be fully present. And I want to take this time to thank our V2020 Task Force, Betsy Spano, Brenda Gustin, Sarah Jamal, Donna Mills, and particularly Joan Marie, who in 2015 first shared with me her wish to acknowledge the year 2020 as a critically important one, marking the 100th anniversary of the United States 19th Amendment, which is, as we all know, the women's right to vote and some other privileges, and more notably, the 150th anniversary of the Mother's Day Proclamation, which is a document that firmly calls for a new paradigm of justice and the great and general interest of peace. This is the actual real Mother's Day history, and it is threaded through and the foundation of our entire V2020 series. Joan told me that she knew this year would also require us to take a serious look and longer strides to what, as she says, make the profane profound again. That is something you can write down. Make the profane profound again. To us here at the Women and Girls sector of the Charter for Compassion, V2020 and the year 2020 signifies crystal clear vision, looking back at what we have learned from our past with clear intentions. We're moving forward to a more compassionate and equitable future for all. And it's in looking back that we can identify the moments in history where the sacred was made profane, and we can start the conversation to restore and elevate our wisdom, creativity, and our glorious disruptive nature. It is a campaign to elevate the voices of women and girls everywhere, and men and boys, by acknowledging our responsibility and personal advocacy. And together we are midwifing a new paradigm that must come from the womb and that place of power and fire through the voice. This requires us to stop comparing ourselves to others, and that we are all enough, and we have what it takes. So in fact, we are being called upon right now to wake up, light up, and rise, as Joan says. So we started our series last month with Dr. Rianne Eisler on the topic of how we got here, as it made perfect sense that we address what set us in this trajectory of imbalance between genders. And there was no one better to guide this next conversation in balance, Clay Boykin, who is founder of the Men's Fellowship Network and has recently published book Circles of Men. Clay is the Assistant Director of Compassion at Austin and an ambassador with Women and Girls. And Clay also works with men in the United States and Kenya and other countries in Africa. And Clay's also known as the G. Willikers good guy. And Union with the Heart's Brenda Gustin, PhD. Brenda is a writer, speaker, educator, healer, facilitator, founder of Union with the Heart, and co-director of the Radiant Health Center as well as co-producer of Alchemy production, Brenda is also co-founder of Compassionate Capital Region and Women and Girls co-lead in that area, as also a ambassador for the Women and Girls sector here. Brenda also serves Mercy Springs Foundation, Chills Sacramento, and the Shift Network, and Ananda worldwide. Now that you've heard about our call and our two facilitators, it will be my delight now to hand the call over to Brenda Gustin, who will take it from there.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome. So great to have you on this call and to introduce everyone to the great work of Cynthia and Will, and with my team, our team, Clay, and all of the women that have put together this series. Joan is a dear friend of mine and here in Sacramento, and is the one who brought me into this and introduced me to Sandy and therefore all of you. What I'm going to do here is begin with reading the Mother's Day Proclamation, although I actually thought we were going to introduce Will and Cynthia, right, Clay?
Yes, I'd like to do that. I'd like to take a minute to do that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I have to say, it's my honor and privilege to introduce two of my favorite people, Reverend Cynthia Brix Phd and Dr. William Keepin, co-founders of Satyana Institute. Reverend Cynthia is an interfaith minister, and she's co-founder and co-director of the Gender Equity and Reconciliation International Project. She's co-founder of the Women's Spiritual Mastery Project and formerly a campus minister at the University of Colorado United Ministries of Higher Education. Reverend Cynthia co-chaired the Race Relations Committee for the city of Muncie, Indiana, and later initiated an interfaith project to address racial tensions at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Reverend Cynthia is a longtime student of Eknath Easwaran and their passage meditation, and leads retreats on interfaith spirituality. She earned her master's degree of divinity from Iliff School of Theology in 2006, and her master's degree in wellness management and applied gerontology from Ball State University in 1999. Reverend Cynthia is contributing author of Divine Duality, The Power of Reconciliation Between Women and Men, and co-author of Women Healing Women. Reverend Cynthia organized an international conference in Turin, Italy, and brought women spiritual masters together from Buddhist, Christian, and Hindu traditions, and produced a DVD video for this conference entitled Cultivating Women's Spiritual Mastery. Welcome, Cynthia. Dr. William Keepin, PhD, founded Gender Equity and Reconciliation Project. He organized, the organization has had more than 150 intensive gatherings in 10 countries for healing and reconciliation between women and men. Will is a mathematical physicist, and with 30 scientific publications on sustainable energy and global warming. And he presented testimony to European and Australian parliaments and the US House of Representatives, and became a whistleblower in the nuclear science policy. Will began practicing silent meditation in 1982 and is trained extensively in the spiritual traditions East and West, holds an MA degree in East-West psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies, and has founded holotropic breathwork for 30 years using the Groff transpersonal training methodology. He leads retreats on interfaith mysticism and interspiritual practice, is a fellow of the Findhorn Foundation and adjunct facility at Holy Name, is part of the adjunct faculty at the Holy Name University. Will is the author of Divine Duality, The Power of Reconciliation Between Women and Men, co-author of Women Healing Women. He's also author of Song of the Earth, The Emerging Synthesis of Spiritual and Scientific Worldviews, and the book Belonging to God, Spirituality, Science, and a Universal Path of Divine Love. And lastly, and certainly not least, Cynthia and Will are co-ministers for Unity Church of Vancouver, British Columbia. Welcome to you both.
Wow.
Thank you very much. It's a joy to join this conversation.
Thank you. So what we'll do is we'll begin now with reading the original Mother's Day Proclamation by Julia Ward Howe. And then we'll move into some questions. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of counsel. Let them meet first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead. Let them then solemnly take counsel with each other as to the means whereby the great human family can live in peace, each learning after his own time the sacred impress, not of Caesar, but of God. In the name of womanhood and humanity, I earnestly ask that a General Congress of Women without limit of nationality may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient and at the earliest period consistent with its objects, to promote the alliance of the different nationalities, the amicable settlement of international questions, the great and general interests of peace.
Gosh. Thanks, Brenda. I'm going to go back and reflect on one passage that really struck me and ask for Will and Cynthia to add their comments if they would. That passage begins with, from the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession. So the question that I'd like to pose to you both is, what has your work discovered to help us heal this functional masculine and feminine within us all that leads us from fighting to serve with Julia Ward Howe's call, the great and general interest of peace?
Thank you, Clay. Thank you for the question. And thank you, Brenda, for reading the proclamation. Do you want to start with?
Well, because that quote that you read begins with from the bosom of the devastated earth, and that is where our work began, because this particular work that we do began in the environmental movement. And just very briefly, I think it's no accident that it began from the movement that was trying to heal our relationship with the earth. And what we discovered after some years was that we had a deep wound within our own human community. That basically we were trying to heal the relationship with the earth, but we had a deep, unhealed wound in our human community that was doing this. And it was manifesting as sexual harassment that was hidden, that was toxic, that could not be spoken about, essentially identical to what we've recently witnessed with the Me Too movement in every sector of society, this same pattern. And so the early work that we did, we called it gender reconciliation, but or gender in ecology. But the byline was, are there parallels between exploitation of the earth and exploitation of the feminine? And so I find this proclamation so inspiring because it goes to the root source of warfare, of devastation of the earth. And so it also calls, and I think it's very significant that it calls for women to gather and form a Congress and to have a council with each other. And I think that's where it correctly recognizes that women needed to gather and begin to develop a women's community, which had been denied them for literally centuries, millennia. And that was the place to begin. As long as women cannot do that with each other, this situation could never change. So I find that proclamation incredibly insightful and inspiring, and far more profound than, of course, what Mother's Day has become, not to diminish what it's become, honoring our mothers. But this was a much deeper and more profound proclamation to really heal the whole of humanity.
Can you imagine if Julia Howe's proclamation was on every Hallmark card? What a change. I don't know how many would sell, but yeah, I was aware of this proclamation years ago as a teenager. I think I started researching Mother's Day a little bit and found it. So it's nice to revisit this. I just want to name what our work is so that people have a sense of that. It's a good place to begin is with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s wisdom teaching of saying injustice and corruption will never be transformed by keeping them hidden, but only by bringing them out into the light with the power of love. And that really says what our work is. We create safe forms for the sensitive and taboo issues around gender and sexuality to be shared and spoken. Issues in our own life, in our own personal life, that to have a place to speak truth to those with the intention of healing, with the intention of reconciling, and without shame or blame, because we're all in this together. We're all being affected. And everything in the patriarchal system, if you will, everything in society and these systems that we have built up as human beings is trying to keep those stories of truth silent and keep the system or the machine keep going. So in the breaking free from that and being able to share truth, we are all liberated, basically. There's a freedom. It's like oxygen breathing through us when we're allowed to share our story of pain and suffering. And it's not as victims, but as in honor of the story, in honor of saying, this is what has happened to me. And it has made me stronger, if you will. And I want to share it because when we share, we find out that our story is unique to us, but it's also a story that has happened to others in the world. And when we gather as a group of women and a group of men in council, like the proclamation is speaking to, there's a community synergy, if you will, or a community energy that happens that actually brings us closer, bonds us more deeply. And in doing so, then we're able to, like I said, break free from that and release that pain and suffering at another level. Oftentimes in in our world, whether it's a workplace or in our church or temple or mosque. We're told to, if something happens to us, we're often told, just, get over it, bury it. Someone dies in our family, you've got to get back to work within 3 days or a week at the max, and, get on with life. And we're not given that time to just be able to heal, be able to be in our grief and sorrow around it. And so our work actually provides a space to address the issues that have happened to us, some from childhood, some from our young adults, some from right now in our current times. Provide that space so that we can not wallow in the pain and suffering, but just have some accountability around it and move through it so that we can actually heal and get to a place of forgiveness, get to a place of feeling like there is a space for reconciliation.
Maybe I'll add a couple things if that would be helpful. Just to say that this you asked about this quote, disarm. And in the historical evolution of patriarchal system, of this whole structural injustice constellated around gender, it really, according to the historian Gerda Lerner, it began with warring tribes, and one tribe would vanquish another, kill all the men, and then basically they had all these women and children who they would take as slaves. So slavery began with the enslavement of women of conquered tribes. And what Gerda Lerner found that I think is so remarkable, she was a historian back in the second half of the last century. She first of all said that women have no history. So she was trying to found a whole history of women and wrote several books. But what she said that really astounded her was in every culture that she studied, going back to 3200 BC, the emergence of patriarchy occurred when women's direct connection to the divine was severed or broken. And she found that this seemed to occur independently in each of these different societies. And that when women lost their spiritual sovereignty in a certain sense, that then patriarchy came in. And what happened was that women's sexuality and their reproductive rights became commodities. And they were kind of then traded economically. And so then we had the invention of property and of class society, and all of these things emerged subsequent to the enslavement and oppression of women. So it's a very remarkable story that she tells with tremendous research backing it up. And it all started from essentially warring tribes. And the whole masculine socialization is really around making men into warriors. So when women call for disarming, they're really calling for changing the very foundation of Western civilization, and probably all of global civilization, but certainly the Western civilization, which is what Gerda Lerner studied. And what happens in women's Congress and women's coming together, as Cynthia was saying, is that a deep truth-telling, truths that have not been able to be voiced are voiced. And as we know, the truth shall set you free. And in our work, it is the depth of truth-telling that is the transformative power. And it first began with women speaking the truth to women about their own experience. And then and that's why the women's movement sort of led this whole thing. But once that's happened, and then men need to get together and create a forum for them to speak their experience. And then the two need to come together, that men and women cannot heal this crisis on their own. Women cannot do it alone. Men cannot do it alone. Men and women need each other because both have been afflicted by this patriarchal gender injustice. And so each needs the other for a true and complete healing.
oftentimes in our work, women are quite surprised to hear the level of pain and suffering that men or boys have gone through. We kind of know it, but not necessarily, not often. And things like tough up, be a man, don't cry, bullying, abuse from partner abuse to men, because men are often, and boys are told to not talk about these things. It's not manly to talk about these things of any kind of vulnerability. And so truthfully, I think that men and boys are losing their humanity, which is what the proclamation is saying. We've lost our boys, you know, that there's we put them in as warriors to go out and fight the good battle, but the good battle is killing our men, not only in the body, but also in their humanity, in their emotional state and their psychic state. And so when we come together, women are often surprised to hear the level of pain and suffering that men have endured or do endure. And that's really important. It's been incredibly important with the Me Too movement for women's stories to come out and these injustices and violations to be brought forward. The challenge there is, or the other side of it maybe, is the opportunity now is for the men's voices to come forward. And that's what our work does, to have equal time there for both to be heard, because we all need to be in this solution together. One thing that I wanted to bring up is a movie, if our viewers haven't seen it, it's called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. And it's a documentary on a situation that was happening, the war that was happening in Liberia. And it wasn't coming to an end, and the men all gathered to try to come to peace, have peace talks around it. And it was historic because the Christian and Muslim women came together in Liberia. They had been separated because of religious belief and because of this warfare, but they came together to do the healing work that the men weren't doing at that time, because the peace talks were going on, but they were not happening. They were getting ready. The men were going to leave and just keep the warfare going on. And the women all gathered and traveled to the place where the peace talks were happening. And they surrounded the building where the men were doing the peace talks, and they wouldn't let them out. They wouldn't let them leave the building until there was peace that had come. And at one point in the movie, they show the men trying to escape out of the windows and everything to get out, and the women are pushing them back in. And then at another time, the men were fed up. They said, we're not going to do this. And the women, some of the women actually started to take their clothes off, which was like just beyond, you just don't do that. This is not going to happen. You know, do not expose yourself in public. But it had come to that point that women said, you know, if we are going to have peace, we will do anything to make this happen. And the men couldn't have it. They said, our women are not going to disrobe. And they got back in there, and they came to a settlement then around the peace agreement, the peace treaty, and it changed everything. So the Council of Women has power in it in ways beyond one can even see. And this is a great movie that exemplifies that, and I just recommend it to our viewers out there. Pray the Devil Back to Hell, it's called. And if you have a library, often it's in libraries that you can find it. No charge.
Well, it's on YouTube.
It's on
for free.
YouTube too, yeah.
One last little detail about that movie that's very important. These were Christian and Muslim women.
Mm-hmm.
And those two communities had very little association. These women did not know each other. The Christians and Muslims did not commune. They lived separately, and the war was between Christians and Muslims. And the Christian and Muslim women got together and put an end to this insanity. And so it also has that whole dimension that's very relevant to our time as well.
I'll just say one more thing, Brenda. I think you were going to speak. one thing that we notice in our work, especially right now with the Me Too movement, is a lot of fear about coming together. Men doing men's work, or just being, even if you don't do men's work, to think about coming and speaking and even being with women is a scary place. And the same is true that women have often done a lot of women's work, but when they think about having the men present, it's scary. What's going to happen? And so one element of our work, a big essential element, is that we spend a lot of time creating safety and getting people, probably a good, almost a full day, that we are creating right in the beginning a safe place for us all to come into, to be able to share our truths. And one way we do that is through community agreements of how we're going to speak to each other, how we're going to be together. Invocation with a lot, if you're not allergic to prayer, with prayer. If prayer doesn't work for you, then I just say with compassion, with love, with good thoughts, good wishes for one another. And so that's a very important piece. And then once the safety is built, then we dive right in and start sharing our stories in different ways. There's different activities we do. But like I said, we don't stay there forever. That's really important, because it'd be pretty depressing to stay in some of these traumatic stories that we're living and hearing. And so at the end of our time together, we come back out of that kind of that challenging, or the place of truth, and yet the place of edginess, and we honor each other. We honor each other for showing up. And the men create a ceremony to honor the women and the feminine, and the women create a ceremony to honor the men and the masculine. And this is really essential, because we realize we haven't healed thousands of years of violation and oppression, but we've begun. And it's important to consecrate that, to acknowledge each other, to bless each other, to offer an offering that is, from our heart, of gratitude and forgiveness often. There was one other thing I wanted to say there. Let me see if I can draw that back in. Well, it'll come back. So thank you for that moment, Brenda. I know you were getting ready to say something, but it felt important to bring that forward.
I'm very glad that you did. Your work is really beautiful. The truth telling is very challenging, as we all know. We hear things in the news, atrocities. We hear that something happens, like in the Me Too movement, and we can't believe it's true. And so oftentimes I hear people they shut it off and pretend it's not true, and, don't have the capacity to really work with the healing. And I appreciate what you're doing in order to create that safe space. That's really important. I'm involved with the Shift Network, and our first California Vision Conference here in Sacramento, California. We had a Dr. Joy on stage about racial healing, and she used to be a nurse. And she said that in wound care, you can heal a wound on the surface, but it keeps coming up and resurfacing all the time. And we all have those deeper wounds. And in order to really, as we know, get down, and this is just physics, but we do hold all this in ourselves, that wounding. And she said, you have to get deeper down beneath the scab, open it up so that you can actually heal it completely. And so while we may not be healing it completely in the sessions, yet over time, we're doing great work in racial healing and the reconciliation. And, this is also why I feel bringing Julia Ward Howe's work forth again and reminding people of this is it gives us the inspiration so that we can, move deeper into compassion, because on a conscious level, more and more people are understanding, or at least doing their best to dip their toe in, what is compassion. And so that's why, you know, the Charter for Compassion is such a great vehicle for us to come together, because it's not steeped in a particular religion or non-religion, because that's where we also have so many of these divides, right? Not only gender, but nationality, religion, and all of those. And yet, how do we come together as humanity?
Yeah.
So the next part then that we wanted to quote and, you know, kind of call out was, as men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of counsel. And so you touched on that, Cynthia, coming together. And the question that we pose is, what do you see as the role for women in this process? And what advice might you share with respect to one's personal healing and healing between the genders? How can individuals really look at that for themselves? And women are gathering in many ways, and yet I also heard you say the women gathering with the men is very important too. And as we know, Clay's work is about gathering men in a different platform, which is also really important and is happening in greater ways too. So you might answer that.
Now, I'd like to just say one thing before we actually answer that, because I just want to acknowledge that we are talking about men and women identified people, and that the gender spectrum is vast, as we know now. And I just want to uplift all the genders and gender expressions. And while we're talking in the binary, and there's a lot of work to be done within the binary, that's really important. I just want to say this work, our work, extends out beyond the binary for people of all gender expressions and identities, all sexual orientations, and it's necessary in across the humanity, if you will, if we're going to heal the wounds.
Yeah, excellent. Yes,
Thank
very
you.
true. That's why in the beginning we mentioned the sacred, when Clay's question was the sacred or divine. Some people aren't comfortable with the word divine, but that sacred masculine, sacred feminine, there's always the dysfunctional that's there. So, and it is, like you said, rooted in love, when we can get to that.
So since we're talking in terms to the kind of the Charter of Compassion community, what I would say is that the foundation, the absolute foundation of our work is compassion, and we apply it in different ways. But you know, if we look at the etymology of the word, compassion means to feel with. You know, calm meaning with, and passion meaning that whole sense of feeling. And compassion then also can mean suffering with and sharing the pain of. And that is really a key part of our work, as well as sharing the joys. As that kind of saying goes, you know, shared miseries are halved and shared joys are doubled. And in a certain sense, compassion is really the root of this work, because both within the women's circles and the men's circles. So in that work, men, for example, who have forsaken the plow and the anvil have paid a huge price for that. And they need a forum in which they can speak about that conditioning that has caused that forsaking and caused them to become essentially warriors, and the price that they've paid for that, that men pay for that. Women also need a forum in which they can speak to their suffering, and when they do, they actually can bridge these divisions, like what happened with the Christian and Muslim women in Liberia, because if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. They bridged the differences in their religions. They came together in their shared suffering in this horrific war, and they put an end to it. And in our work, to give an example of how the compassion works. So we bring women and men together. I'll just give you one example of how it works, because this is the core principle of our work. And we had, in one of our advanced workshops, we had a woman who had been raped, a brutal rape, and she came to prepare to face her rapist in court. So this was in South Africa, and she had, this had happened some months earlier, and she came to a couple of our workshops to prepare herself. And at one point in the advanced workshop, she actually told her story, her rape story, with a very powerful degree of, and essentially as a witness, to explain and reveal the experience of that horrific experience for women and men. And very few of the women had ever heard a story told in such detail. And I guarantee you, none of the men had ever heard this type of story. And afterwards, there was this incredible, deep silence in the room. And finally, one of the men spoke. And his words were, "I don't know how to be a man anymore. I feel traumatized." And so we worked with him and we helped him to understand that the reason he felt traumatized was because he had now taken into his own heart part of this woman's pain, and it was traumatizing him. And so what happened there was that there was a bridge between her pain and this man. And this is a core principle of our work, that when we feel the pain of the other as our own pain, compassion, right? When we feel the pain of the other as our own pain, then there is a bridge between the hearts, and that creates a transformative experience for both of us. And sure enough, in this case, this was a major turning point in this young man's life. A year later, he joined our training, and then he did our entire training and is now a facilitator of our work in South Africa, bringing this healing and transformative work to others. But the key point is this business of the bridge across the hearts and the divisions that the human family has created within our own ranks that are held separate by religion, by, nation states, whatever it might be. And when we experience the pain of the other as our own pain, we create a bridge that breaks down those divisions.
And Brenda, I'm not sure if I heard one of your questions correctly, but I'll go with it, of what women are to do now. I don't know if you said that. Okay. Yeah. And I'd expand that, but I think there's a level of lack of trust. And this is in the gender arena, but it's also in the race and culture arena as well. It's like the system and the people, all of us in the system have done things to hurt each other and wound each other, whether it's us directly or the masses of people. And so how can I step in and trust that I'm not going to get hurt or even killed? I mean, how many people have been killed by gender injustice, right? And so we, at this time, and I see this across, like in this country, in the United States, I see Indigenous people, Native Americans, taking a step forward, even with all the horrific genocide that's happened here, and no recognition from our government of what's happened, no acknowledgement of that, really. They're taking, several people I know are taking a step forward and saying, it's time to heal this wound. And if we stay in a place of just woundedness, stay in a place of non-forgiveness, then we'll never get there. So it's taking that first step, which takes courage, and starting to test the waters in a sense. And as soon as we do that, in the place of knowing we're in a safe environment that can do it, because we have to trust ourselves first to step into that before we trust anybody else. And so as we learn that, you used in the beginning that someone said, I'm not sure, but we're good enough. We've got this. We all know how to do this healing work. We all know what the problems are, and we all know what to do to heal it. And we just need to get in and start rolling up our sleeves and doing it with that love, with that compassion. And one thing as a parent, I have 2 kids, and now Will and I are grandparents of a 14-month-old. I had to learn as a young mother to that love comes in many forms, and sometimes it comes in tough love, and to set boundaries and to say the truth of what's going on, and love with all my heart, but also to know that I had to have those boundaries and be tough in it. And that's what's required right now. Not to rewound, to when things get in my way, I've got to stay clear in myself around, be genuine, be authentic, but also to come with a healing intention, not to come with an intention to re-wound. And if that starts coming up, to move that out of the way and find that love again and lean into it rather, we've got a culture of call out sometimes in calling out the injustices, which there's a place for that at times. But oftentimes that also can be a place of rewounding, and rather than leaning in and let's do this together. I just want to say one story that happened. Will gave an example too that was real beautiful. It just happened a few weeks ago, where a young woman who didn't have a lot of trust around the process that we were going into, but she stepped in with courage. She's in her 20s. And she started sharing about the injustice that had happened in the workplace. She had worked with her boss for probably several years, 5 or 6 years, and they had been a very close team. And he was married with children. And at one point, they were traveling together, they were working on projects together, they were just like best friends almost in a work relationship with good boundaries. And then all of a sudden he said, I'm in love with you. And she said, no, that's not what I intended here. This is not where I want to go. And he couldn't hear that. He continued to pressure her, and she lost her job. He fired her eventually because she wasn't, meeting him where he wanted to go and wasn't respecting where she was needing it to be. And she was incredibly hurt by that and wounded. She lost her career. Economic issues came in because she couldn't pay her bills, all these things. So when she walked into our workshop, she was feeling like she couldn't trust at all. And here are these men who represented, even though the men in the workshop had not done this, they represented kind of every man out there that could have the potential of doing this to her. And she had had other experiences in her intimate relationships of pain and suffering, of betrayals and things. So this was just adding to that list, I guess. When she spoke her truth and shared her story, and the men in the workshop were in silent witness as the women shared, and that then shifted where the women are in silent witness and the men are sharing, but first the women went in this workshop. She said later that the mirror, if you will, the mirror experience, or maybe I'd change that to the profound experience, because it is profound to have someone give your full attention, your full presence, and just fully listen to what your story is. When that happened for her, when the men sat there, she said, every man in that room became the man that betrayed her, that was sitting there listening with his full attention to help her heal that. And she knew the men in that room were not the man that betrayed her, but their presence was allowing her to go there. And she felt safe enough to do it. And there was tremendous healing for her and forgiveness. She came into a place of forgiveness.
Yeah. Thanks, Cynthia. I I reflect on my own engagement in the facilitator training and how profound it is. And hearing you share that takes me to the training in Kenya that took place. And it was a lesson to me that, yes, here in the West where we're familiar, but how this work translates worldwide and how the young people there opened up for the first time in sharing in a highly patriarchal society was incredibly profound and speaks to the depth and the breadth and the quality of the work that takes place. And I'm grateful to be part of that. I wanted to go back to one thing, Brenda, when you were reading, and the phrase "forsake the plow." I was looking, and you know, it was in May of 1914 that Woodrow Wilson proclaimed, recognized the Mother's Day Proclamation. Some 60 days later, World War I broke out. It was almost foreboding. And there were 22 million people killed and 20 million casualties. And that just came zinging back to me when you were reading that phrase, "forsake the plow." So with that, I've got a follow-on question. And actually it comes from this part of the proclamation, and let me read that. "Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears, say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause." So my question is, where do we go from here?
Well, we need to basically find a way to move beyond the celebration of war, don't we? Because this is a big part of it, the wreaking of carnage for caresses and applause.
Absolutely.
You know, the military, in the military has a place, and we certainly recognize the importance of it. But the extent to which that degree of socialization of men and of nation states into essentially the capacity to make war is so foundational for our civilization that we've even forgot. We don't realize the price we're paying for that. And a couple of things I want to say here. One is that this whole thing began, at least according to the research that I understand, both from Gerda Lerner and from Maria Gimbutas and Rianne Eisler and others' work. It began with basically humans making war on each other, and it's sort of a byproduct of that whole reality. So somehow we need to go back to really transforming that way of settling the great questions being decided that way. And with the advent of nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, we're now in a situation where if we don't do that, we have now the capacity to destroy all human societies and perhaps all life, or at least to wreak a level of destruction that was unimaginable in these early tribal society days. So it's as if the ante is up and we are truly called upon to make this transformation in the human family. that it's absolutely essential and foundational. It's no longer an option, if it ever was, but certainly now it is essentially required of us now to really learn how to live peaceably together on this planet and to transform these dynamics in our societies and in our socialization of men and women and really all human beings. So, I mean, that's what I take from that message. I think it's very significant, as you say, that it came out shortly before World War I, almost like she was precognitively aware of the urgency of this message at that time.
I think we're seeing the rise of all women, or most women. I'm reminded of in India, the human chain of women that I don't know how many, there were thousands of women though that created a chain. Brenda or Clay, are you familiar with that? Do you remember this? It just happened.
No, I did not see it.
Because they were banned from the temple.
They were banned from the temple, and so the women arose and banded together and made a human chain across a great sector of India to protest. In South Africa, the women are rising up because the violence against girls and women, a rough estimate is every 33 seconds, a girl or a woman is violated. Just take that in for a minute. Every 33 seconds. That means how many women or girls have been violated just in the time that we have been talking here.
Yes.
You know, and you talk about warfare and all the people that have died in the warfare that you just mentioned, Clay. This is warfare all the time. And when we talk about the gender injustice, it's at different levels. So women and girls are being violated and killed just because we're women and girls. Men are having to lose their humanity to not speak out and being violated in other ways. I'm not saying there's an equal piece here. I don't know. On one level, I don't know the violations because some is so hidden in the ways that it happen, and some is so, out in the open about the ways that we're violated. We're all in this together, so we all need to be rising up. And I would say, in a sense, that we don't have a choice. First of all, if we're going to birth into the new civilization, we need to rise up, and we need to be midwives for each other. Yes. And we're in many different phases right now of this human evolution, if you will. We're in the phase of crisis, of triage. We're in the phase of hospice. We're in the phase of birthing. We're in the phase of conception. And so all of these pieces, and we just need to show up for it. We just need to show up in whatever way we can. And so times I think I can and others can get stifled because it seems so huge. How are we going to do anything when we see the news of the violation, the crisis, the virus, the blah, 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 whatever the new thing is? And we just need to do it in our own personal lives on a daily level. One thing we ask in our programs, we do an activity and then we vision what a truly gender healed world would look like. What would it be like to wake up in the morning and get out of bed and walk out to your family, to your breakfast table? How would it be different if the world was gender healed? How would it be to walk down the street or get on the bus or go to work? What would be different? And so taking some time just to vision that and imagine it, not let all this would never happen, that's not gonna work, whatever. Get rid of all those ideas and just let our hearts envision what the possibility is, because if we can't envision it, we can never live it. And so it's changing the script, it's changing the narrative, changing the story. And that's just one moment at a time with each person. Find a way to be in community with people who align with you, that support you, that uplift you, even if it's just one person, even if it's being on this call that's going to give you the support you need to be able to be that change agent in the world. And that's how it's going to change, one person at a time. It's very simple, in a sense. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add one more thing, because one of the things that we discover in our work is that we human beings, and now thinking just in terms of men and women, have created a society that what is discovered in our work that nobody wants. That basically women are suffering in a particular way, men are suffering in a particular way, and when this truth is brought forward, there's a mutual recognition that we don't really want this. We've all created it, we're all part of it, but we don't want what we've created. And we find, for example, that men, when they have the opportunity to truly speak their truth of their experience and the pain of their conditioning, they are able to begin to shed it. The vast majority of men want a loving and respectful relationship with women in their lives, and they haven't been given a model of how to do it. They are socialized into the traditional male way of being with women, especially as young men and adolescents and coming into, experiencing, pornography and all of these exploitative modalities of conditioning that take place for them. But when they have a chance to really get to the core truth within them, that's not what they want, but they're not given really an alternative. And one of the key factors of our work is that, really of the patriarchy, is that untold stories keep oppression invisible. The entire system functions on keeping the truth down, so that these stories where people begin to speak their truth, as Julia Howe did in this proclamation, never get spoken, and that there's no forums. This work that we do of the deep level of truth-telling between women and men is taboo in every single institution of society. It's taboo in the family, it's taboo in the church, it's taboo in the government, it's taboo in the educational institutions. It's never been allowed until now. It's just beginning to come forward because of the Me Too movement. But what we've discovered is if we can create skillful forums where these levels of truth-telling can take place, then the entire kind of edifice of patriarchal conditioning begins to crumble within a few days. One of the ways that we put it is that patriarchy is thousands of years old, but only a few days deep, because these falsehoods begin to be revealed fairly quickly. And men and women discover that we've all been betrayed by this system, and we all want something different, and we can begin to build that together.
Yes. Doing this together and having the courage to speak up, and feeling that safety, that container that you're creating. And I feel that we're creating with the Charter for Compassion in many ways, and seeing this happen even in our businesses. It's starting to happen. I teach yoga and meditation at a medical in a medical system, and so it's about helping people to really drop into the truth of who they are. And it's amazing, because when we set out the truth, we see how illogically we've been participating in a system that is sold to, that we're enculturated into to believe it's logical, and it's not. It's completely the opposite, the antithesis of it, of the humanity within us. Sandy's going to open up the floor for us, because we're going to come into the after party, and I thank you both. And now I look forward to what's next also with this group here.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Brenda, Clay, and Cynthia, and Will. I'm not often speechless, or for a loss of words, as anybody who knows me will attest. But I am deeply and profoundly grateful for you and your work, and really hitting the head of the nail, right? Really getting to the root system of this deep wound that has plagued us for all of our civilized life on this planet. So thank you both, and before then, of course, as well. So I am now going to bring everybody onto the call. After so many attempts with Zoom to make this easier, bottom line is it's going to be a little clunky, but I'm going to ask everybody who's on their computer and their phone to just mute yourself while we're doing this, and then you're going to be brought on the call. That way we don't have any background noise. So that would be that. Then we can work in cooperation and collaboration together. Now I'm going to, one at a time, start bringing you into the call, and thank you for your patience as you start showing up here. I'm going to promote y'all the panel.
Do that, Sandy. Can I just clue everybody in? We would love
do that while I'm doing the surgery on the back end.
Exactly. You're so great at that. And we have a Facebook page. Some of you may be aware of it, V2020. And we'd like people, invite people to dialogue there and share your stories. And because, like we know, putting that into voice is very important. And today, what we'd like to do in this next 20 minutes or so that we have, unfortunately, we only have a certain amount of time, do your best to really get to the heart of what you want to share or the question that you might have for Will and Cynthia. And we'll just support that. Yeah, anchoring your voice here is important. And so just as be compassionate with the time, as Clay says, and welcome. I'll get out of the way.
Thank you so much, Brenda. And I'd also like to just remind everybody, or let everybody know, I should say, that the reason that we created the V2020 Facebook page was to continue this conversation. We know that an hour and a half is never enough time when you have just been completely blown out of your chair by these amazing folks. So we want to continue to hear from you. We want to continue the exchange. We want to continue to hear your voice. So that's a place where you can contribute even more if you don't get a chance here. And if you would like to, while I'm bringing folks in, you know, let me see, let me bring in first and foremost, I'm going to break the rules here. Let's see, Joan Marie is actually on the call. You've heard us speaking of Joan, who inspired and instigated this whole series with us, and largely why we're having this call. So would you like to start the conversation and the question, or any comments you have? Joan, we'll start with you, and then we'll let everybody perhaps raise your hand or your pinky, whatever you like, to let us know that you would like to go next. Can we hear from you, Joan? There are a lot of you. Sorry, it's taking me a little longer than I thought.
That's so funny. I see somebody with my name, and it's Donna.
Donna. So anyway, okay, so we actually have a hand raised while we're waiting for Joan, perhaps to, I don't know, I see her, maybe she can't find her unmute button. But why don't we go ahead? Bijan Rafi? Are you with us? Are you muted? By the way, thank you all. You've done such a good job muting yourself.
Sandy, while we're waiting for him to come in, just a reminder that we've got the chat window open, and I'll be fielding questions from there as well.
Thank you.
And so is there someone else that I would like to speak up at this moment? Since we're not hearing from, there we go. Okay, Stephen.
We'd like to break the dam. That's what happens.
Stephen, go ahead.
And I did put a message in chat while we were talking. Cynthia and Will were talking about the starting the wars, and my comment, my thought that came to mind was war and fighting. It starts with the separation and the individual egos. It is a lower level of energy and the lower frequency of matter. Whereas if one can raise their energy from within, where they feel a connection without the egos, then there is peace. And at our church, we say, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. Y'all have been talking about the big picture and the organizations and all the cooperation, which is great. But this last weekend, Panache Desai was in town and talked about starting from within and finding that divine energy from within.
So, Steve, I'll just make a comment, and that you're right in line with where we are. In fact, in our lives, Will and I are a married couple, and in our marriage and in all the work, one of the requirements of our trainees and our facilitators is to have some kind of contemplative practice, because it needs to begin within. It needs to begin with us in the inner work, and then it comes out into the world in our service. So thank you for that comment, Steve. Yeah,
Very true.
Beautiful. Joan, by the way, I think Joan might be back with us. Joan, can we hear you now?
Yes. Yes. Can you hear me?
Good, thank you. And then
Can you hear me?
Dennis' hand raised. Yes. After that, yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. I am so filled with gratitude in listening to this call, and this has been a 10-year journey for me, being called by Spirit to share with as many people as I could about the proclamation. And this being the 150th anniversary seems an important year to really accelerate the principles. And I really want to acknowledge the work that you're doing. Seems like a beautiful format for the template that she laid out about the importance that before people gather, they need to grieve together. And I think that you have created an arena that allows and supports that for both men and women. And it was so powerful to hear about the work that you're doing. So I'm hoping that information is going to be posted on the V2020 so people can know how to take the training or participate. And I'd love for you to talk a little more about that. And thank you for doing this call.
Well, maybe I'll just say a couple of things about that. Thank you for that reflection. And it's true that our work really works with what we sometimes call a collective alchemy, where we move into the grief and into the pain together with a very carefully and skillfully structured format, so that we can do that in a way that is mutually respectful. But we don't stay there, as Cynthia said. We come through that, and we discover in the midst of that, what happens is all of that conditioning drops away. We see one another soul to soul, and we see one another and relate heart to heart. And then we build that communion, and reconciliation emerges naturally. And as we say, our work moves then beyond mutual respect and equal rights to reclaiming mutual reverence between men and women, between men and men, and between women and women. And this is so important. And what I would say, we've worked with thousands of men and women now in 10 countries across all the different major cultures of the world on 6 continents. And one thing that we have learned, that in every case, what men discover is the greatest male privilege is not any of the advantages that are afforded to men in the patriarchal society. The greatest male privilege is to be actively participating in the deconstruction of this unjust patriarchal system itself, and to partner with women in that process. That is the true and great male privilege. And it's such an amazing experience to see them discovering that and then claiming that for themselves. And that's what our training is about. We're training the next generation of leaders in this work. Maybe you want to say a little bit about the training, but it's basically around, and Clay is one of the trainees in our training. So he can also say a little bit about it. But basically what it is, it's an immersion experience of men and women working together, moving through the grief together, and then developing the skills to facilitate others and facilitate their communities in going through this transformative work as well.
And Will,
how do we get you in Sacramento?
Give us a
Invite
call.
us.
I'll put our phone number on the chat and our email and things, so you'll have it.
Well, I'd like to jump in and just share that it is incredibly profound. You know, the work that the guys that are in the men's circle are doing is really foundational work so that we can be prepared to show up for this. And before I knew about Will and Cynthia, before I met y'all at the Parliament, the question in my mind was, okay, we men do our work. What now? How do we move forward to that next place? And when Will, you and I first talked, I remember we spoke for about a minute and our head was shaking like this. And it's like, yeah, we get it. And this was just the next natural evolution. As women do their work, men do their work. Now we're ready to do this work together. And it's just incredibly profound and humbling and enlightening.
and I want to interject that Clay's work with the Circles of Men is a worldwide movement, and there are people locally, men who are doing this work here in Sacramento. And I invite the men that are doing that in the different parts of the world to come together with each other, like with Clay. He's, creating a good circle, and with you. And I don't want to forget that Dennis raised his hand a little earlier.
I wanted to get to Dennis and then Nancy for sure. Thank you so much. Dennis, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself. Let me see if I can do it. I can unmute you. There you go.
Thank you for unmuting me. I'm so grateful to be part of this and what's happening now in the world. And Cynthia, thank you for pointing out the small opportunities for us to work. And Will, as a physicist, you can say this much better than I, but I know that there is a tipping point in an avalanche when that last snowflake happens. And we won't know when that happens. We won't know what it is, but without that, without the other snowflakes that had fallen before, that last one would not have happened. And I look at this each and every day to have that opportunity to do the small things that contribute.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Dennis. As Mother Teresa said, it's not necessary to do great things, but to do small things with great love. And that's what will build. And we actually believe, you spoke of a tipping point. We believe this kind of work will create a tipping point in gender relations in the human family within a single generation. And that's the long-term 30-year plan that we're putting together with various social entrepreneurs, because all the conditions are there. The demand is there, the need is there, the internet, the communications, and the hunger, the yearning is so strong to transform these issues that we think that we could see a sea change within the next 20 to 30 years. And that's what we're aiming for.
And really our work is, of course, about gender. And at the same time, it's about beloved community. It's about being in community. So we do have workshops, we have trainings. We're moving into more online trainings as well, so that people that maybe can't show up in a physical workshop, they can get a little taste of it. So we're really working at multiple levels for this. And we have a worldwide community now, just like we're seeing here on this call, where we go deeply into the issues. And it's amazing what can be done on Zoom, even to go to pretty intimate conversations and know that we're connected, know that we're not alone out there. That's the key factor.
Yeah, thank you so much. I got the task to make sure everyone's voice is heard here, and we have 3 waiting. I had said that I told Nancy that she would be next, but actually Bijan was first and we couldn't hear him. So we're just going to jump right to Bijan, and then we'll go right to you, Nancy, and then just say.
You can hear me okay?
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to, again, thank you for putting this on. I was invited by Sarah Jamil, and I'm really grateful for having this opportunity. Just an hour ago, I had a nice chat with Clay as well. It's not very often that you have an experience like this and you see everything you hear resonates 100%. There's always some of them, I'm not sure about this part, I'm not sure about that one. This was almost like 100% alignment. What we do under the Canadian Center for Men and Families, so what we receive is, what I see is the men who are hurt. And it's constant, very difficult calls, very difficult emails, people who are needing help. And I just wanted to make an observation, a few observations, which is actually were said, but just to highlight a few things that I really, I thought is important. We talk about gender reconciliation. What I see this as a gender appreciation and gender understanding. I know William was talking about, and Cynthia, about the groups where women who are hurt, they come to a community with lots of, there are other men there, they talk about it, and they just, that connection really is part of that healing and makes a big difference. I was actually part of a meeting where it was for victims of sexual abuse, and both men and women were victims, and how they helped each other. They help each other heal. Another thing I just want to observation is, what I'm seeing is a great deal of the problems we have, and I'm saying from the guy's angle, it's the inequality in expectations. It's a lot of the behavior we see in men that can cause issues is they are socially driven behaviors. It's driven by what men think we are expected to do, and it's hurting and it's killing men actually. So whenever we're talking about things getting better, men are usually actually much better beneficiary of men become a gentle society than women are. Men always get a better part of it. I was very happy when the Me Too movement happened, and it was I saw it as an opportunity for men coming and talking about, oh, wait a minute, men too, we have these issues as well. So I don't want to say much more. Again, just thank you, and I'm really looking forward to future meetings and getting together in this space with you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bijan, for sharing that wisdom. And next is Nancy. Sorry, was there any comment you wanted to make, Cynthia and Will, in regards to that?
No, just thank you for your comments. It's
just
beautiful.
Really appreciate it. Appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
I want to be sensitive to time, and I'm willing to stick around for a while. I never want these calls to end. So you understand if you have to go, but okay, I'll stop talking and hear from Nancy.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. Thank you. Thank you very much. Cynthia and Will, I think I took attended Dr. Linda's World International Global Phenomenon last year. You did present there, right?
Yes.
So I did you did a little workshop there. So yes, I love that. Yeah, wonderful. So so I'm a holistic doctor. What I'm thinking of when you're speaking, this word keeps coming in my mind. I keep hearing mending. And I thought I would, and for Clay as well, I thought I would ask all of you then, what do you think? I'm looking at that mending from stitching, you made a great hand gesture there before, Clay. Even from a doctor standpoint, even from this epidemic standpoint, like where's the origin? What would you say in your work? How do you get men in? I know for me, in my work, we laughingly say women and children first and every man for himself, because we'll bring them in, because usually the women come in and then they make their husband come or their father or whatever for care. What do you find is the entry point that gets men to come in and not admit to say I'm sick, want to break out of that epidemic and start something? What do you find that? And also, what is the obstacle to getting men to participate?
So
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. There are definitely men who are involved in men's groups that work to break into the man to get him into his heart. What I'm finding is that there's a huge population of men out there who are already in their hearts. They're broken and that's festering and they're dying from within. And they don't need someone to help break into them. They're already there and they're stuck. They may have gone through their recovery program and looking for spirituality or something higher, but they're not going to go back to church because they got burned on organized religion. They can speak with their spouse or partner at a certain level, but there's another level that's got to be a connection with another man. But we're taught not to trust each other. So what I have found successful is creating a safe and sacred space for men to come together without judgment, without anybody trying to fix them, get into a conversation so that we can begin to speak from head to heart, connect that, yes, and also connect the heart to the mouth so that we can speak from there and we can learn, oh, I'm not the only one with that feeling. Oh, me too. And learn the energy of a circle of men bonding and learning how to go through life together. You know, in every circle, you get 20 guys together, you have over 1,000 life years of experience right there in that circle. My goodness, there's something that I can learn, you know, from Dennis and Will could learn from me and so forth. If we just show up for each other without judgment, without feeling like someone's going to try and fix us. By God, all I want sometimes, I just want to be heard. How many of you felt like that? So creating those circles, that is a way that I see of breaking through traditionally what so many of us go through this patriarchal structure. So thanks for asking that question.
Yeah.
So
that's an
basically,
important question.
they're already there. Just bring attention that there's a circle here in your neighborhood, in your community, and they'll somehow show up.
And it's safe. And it's safe.
Well, the other thing I just want to say is that over the years, you know, we've been doing this work 28 years, and the numbers of men coming to this work have gone way up. And the caliber of their awareness and preparation has also gone up. At the same time, we still have many more women than men. We have a training starting at the end of this month, a year-long training, and the last week of March, and we still have some slots open, particularly for men, but for either. So we still have, most of our programs, women outnumber men about 2 to 1. But what has happened recently is that different men's organizations, you know, there's Clay's work, there's the Mankind Project, there's Illuman, there's these different men's organizations that have approached us to form formal partnerships with them to do men's and women's works within their context. And so we've had a number of workshops recently with a lot more men than women, which is wonderful. But in general, we are still finding that we get fewer men than women, but the men that are coming are really exciting. This next training we have a powerful group of women and men coming, because our major task now is to train the next generation of leaders in this work. And we are a training organization primarily because we've honed this methodology, and now we're taking it out as widely as possible.
You know, I'm going to just one last comment. What I'm learning and what I've learned over the past 8 years and what I'm seeing with Will and Cynthia's work, I really believe that there is a new compassionate male emerging in the world. That's who's showing up here. And that new compassionate male, I believe, is emerging as the new archetype, not to negate any of the other archetypes, but as an overarching, the new compassionate male. That's something for us all to aim at.
And what will you put in the chat box the qualities that we could recognize in the new archetype?
Perhaps we need another call specifically around this call. I mean, look what a robust conversation this is. Dennis is in. By all means, I mean, I think that's a vast conversation.
That's a whole search. You know, that's what I'm dedicating this year to is In Search of the New Compassionate Male. I can't answer that definitively, but I think collectively we all can define that archetype.
Right. And didn't we learn from,
Probably emerging from your groups, right, from your circles.
didn't we learn from also from Rianne in our last call? It's really returning to the basics of our foundation of who we are as humanity before it was learned out of men and learned into women as well. So thank you. I think we really have just birthed another call in the series. I think we actually have it, but maybe we need to move it up on the calendar. And we do have time for one more question. Again, I have to be the timekeeper here. And Sarah Jamal has been waiting patiently. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sandy. I want to go, well, thank you to everyone, and thank you for all the conversation that's coming up. I want to go back to, well, when you were saying, go back to the history of the women, the research that was done, and when the point where women were denied access to the divine or their communion with the divine. And that to me, like I made a note of that, because one thing is I feel we have been stuck in the whole gender role conversation. And I'm feeling like with all these conversations, we're getting into what Sandy just mentioned, that what has actually always been, which is the soul, which is the what were we originally. And what I'm finding through my, the work I do with Compassion First is mostly for women and girls, but why? It is because we're making space for the men and boys in our families to actually connect with the soul first. And the question I had made here, or not question, but where do we go from here? My answer, or my piece of wisdom, or where I want to focus is, can we get back to that work of what the soul already exists, and like the answer to what we're seeking has always been here. We just haven't seen it, and we're only beginning to see it again, or we forgot it because of all the constructed societies. So when you do your work, Will and Cynthia, and also now Clay and Brenda and all of us, where does the, like, where's the work on the soul there? Like, do you feel that could be our meeting point, like when we discuss gender roles? And so one thing is the equality of the soul is equal, like even in my teachings, what we're being taught to avoid all this gender inequality is to focus on the soul's direct link with creator, whatever you believe in. I don't know if I expressed my question properly, but it was more a comment and a question, or like a solution. What anything you'd like to add to that?
I'd like to share something we were going to be doing with Will and Cynthia, and have done with you, Sarah, and so with the Alchemy is, and so many people are doing, and I know that Will and Cynthia do this too, and you maybe could address it. It's the listening circles, and really learning how to listen. And Clay and I, we were doing something, and maybe Sandy and I too, and it was closing the eyes and just listening without seeing who it is, so that we take off that veneer, whatever that is. And I was sharing that, and it's what we do in our circles. We did it here with Joan too. And so Clay then said, you do this in your work. And perhaps that's something that we could do right now as we close, maybe not necessarily experientially, up to you, yet to offer a solution for each of us in our own relationship to close down and really listen. Just really listen to the other. No comment, no, when somebody talks. You do that, right, Cynthia and Will?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We were honoring what you were asking for. No comment. You left us speechless.
What we do in Braveheart Women, which I was involved in, is we allow an oxytocin breath. When someone completes,
Yeah.
they say, I'm complete. And then we say, ah, because then we open to the parasympathetic system
Yeah.
in all the cells.
And so often in the men's circle, we say, I hear you.
And I just want to appreciate your question, Sarah, because it's a very, you've really gone to the root of the core issue here, is that there is this need to connect directly with our own souls. And our whole culture somehow leads us astray, so we need to come back to that. So in our work, it's very foundational to, and we work with people of all different religious and spiritual orientations, including atheists, but everyone has a heart. And by connecting to the heart, they're beginning to connect to that inner doorway to the infinite within. And that is really the core and the key of this work, because as women and men begin to reclaim that connection within, the veils drop and we see each other soul to soul. And this is absolutely foundational to the work. And it's where then that primordial essence and truth comes in, as well as our connection to our true power, because our true power comes from spirit. It comes from that source. And when we connect inwardly to our hearts, we connect to our souls and our true power and our loving essence. So you beautifully, I love your question. I love the work that you're doing. And it's very true that the core of this work is reconnecting with our spiritual essence. And that then creates that bridge across our hearts that brings us together as a human family, basically as a beloved community, and in alignment with the cosmic universal force, whether we call that God or universal love or whatever it might be.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Cynthia. What a great way to close our call with that inspiration, and reminds me of your statement you made earlier that truth is a transformational power. And so thank you so much for speaking truth to power. We are going to close now. I'm sorry if some of you had other things to add. We are up against the clock here. So thank you so much. And please do, you will be getting copies of all of the links that were mentioned, but you can also save chat. That is in, there's 3 little buttons on your chat dialog box. So you can click on, you'll see save chat. You can save it directly, but you'll also get them filtered in along with the call. This is a good time to let you know that our next call, our next VW, I'm going to ask everybody to mute if you can. We're getting some background noise. So our next V2020 will be April 15th. That background noise. Here we go. Here we go. All righty. Oh, I think Betsy wanted to say something. Sorry, Betsy. Our next call will be our intrinsic values and gifts, the goddess archetype, and that is with world-renowned experts Jean Shinoda-Bolen and Dr. Carmen Bolter, who I believe is on our call still right now. So hello, Dr. Carmen. We're really happy. I'm happy to see you joining this call too. And again, we're going to discuss some Mother's Day proclamation, and really to find out what it means to discover your energetic imprint, to better understand the archetypal energy of the feminine goddess, as you may recognize in yourself. But today, I think we can all agree we may need another call on the new male archetype, or returning to the true male archetype, perhaps, as I think consensus will have it. You will also find us on Facebook at under V2020, Charter V2020. And that is it. I want you to know that we are all volunteers here at the Charter. And if you like this program and want to see more of them, the Charter welcomes your donations. And as do Will and Cynthia, I'm sure that I noticed there's a donate button on your box too. And thank you for your extraordinary work, and blessings that it may be kept flourishing. We're going to end this call how we end every one of our calls like this. And typically we all say goodbye at the same time. We all unmute ourselves and we say goodbye at the same time. We can do that. Goodbye, shalom, peace, shanti, whatever it is you'd like to say. But perhaps after that, we can all say goodbye and then end with an oxytocin breath. Like Brenda, this is just Brenda inspired. All right. So first, let's all say goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Blessings. And now for that breath, then I'll close our call.
With pleasure.
Thank you again.
Biggest nerve, grace under pressure.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.